My family demanded an $85,000 party at my restaurant saying, "You owe us." The audacity made me place $100 on the table and walk away. What happened next shocked everyone. I'm Michael, 34 male, and my family just ambushed me with plans for my brother's $85,000 graduation party, insisting I host it at my restaurant for free because, as my father put it, "You owe us." I'm still trying to process the sheer audacity of it, the culmination of a lifetime of being treated not as a son but as a future asset, a resource to be tapped when convenient. My restaurant, the Gilded Spoon, is my life. I built it from nothing, with sweat, sacrifice, and a level of dedication my family has never once tried to understand. To them, its success is not my own, it is simply their dividend finally coming due. The dynamic has always been this way, a lopsided scale with my brother Leo on one side, piled high with praise, support, and endless financial infusions, while I teetered on the other, expected to fly with clipped wings. Leo is the golden child, 11 years my junior and the recipient of every advantage I was denied. He is charming, handsome, and has floated through life on the cloud of our parents' adoration. I, on the other hand, am the workhorse, the pragmatic older brother who was expected to be self-sufficient from the moment I could legally work. The first stark lesson in this familial imbalance came when I was 18. I had my heart set on a 4-year university program for hospitality management. I had done the research, filled out the applications, and even received a partial scholarship. All I needed was for my parents to co-sign a modest student loan, a common enough request. My father, Richard, sat me down at the kitchen table, his face a mask of stern disappointment. "A 4-year degree is a luxury, Michael," he had said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You're a practical boy, you should do something practical." He slid a brochure for the local community college across the table. "You can get a business certificate in 2 years, work while you study, and you won't be saddled with debt." It wasn't about the debt, it was about their unwillingness to invest in me. "But Leo," I started and was immediately cut off. "Leo is different," my mother, Carol, chimed in, placing a placating hand on my father's arm. "His path is more academic. It's not a fair comparison." They were right, it wasn't a fair comparison. When Leo graduated high school, there was no discussion of community college. His acceptance into a prestigious private university was celebrated with a lavish party. His tuition, his dorm fees, his meal plan, his brand new car to get him to and from campus on holidays, it was all covered without a moment's hesitation. They took out a second mortgage on their home to ensure Leo would want for nothing. I watched this all from the sidelines, working 2 jobs to pay for my community college classes and a third on weekends to save for my dream of one day opening a restaurant. The irony was thick enough to choke on. They were going into actual, significant debt for Leo, while the phantom of a small, co-signed loan for me had been deemed an unacceptable risk. The second lesson, and the one they loved to bring up, was the infamous $5,000 loan. About 5 years ago, just a year after I had finally scraped enough together to open the Gilded Spoon, the restaurant's main walk-in freezer died spectacularly. It was a catastrophic failure, and replacing it was an expense I simply couldn't absorb at that critical stage. I had exhausted my savings and maxed out my business credit. Swallowing my pride, a pride forged in the fires of their indifference, I asked my parents for a loan. My father made a great show of it. He sat me down again, this time in his study, and lectured me for an hour on fiscal responsibility, implying that my predicament was a result of poor planning. He made it feel less like a son asking his father for help and more like a high-risk applicant at a bank. In the end, they gave me the $5,000, but it wasn't a gift. It was a formal loan with a signed contract and a repayment schedule that included interest. I worked tirelessly, picking up extra catering gigs, and paid them back in full in just under 11 months. I even sent them a thank you card with the final payment, naively hoping it would mark a turning point in our relationship, a moment where they might finally see my dedication. Instead, that $5,000 became a legendary family artifact. It was no longer a loan, it was the great sacrifice they had made, the lifeline they had thrown me. In their retelling of the story, that money was the sole reason the Gilded Spoon existed. They conveniently forgot the years I had spent working 3 jobs, the sleepless nights, the social life I had completely forsaken. They had planted a single seed and now laid claim to the entire forest. The most painful memory, however, was the grand opening of my restaurant. It was the single most important night of my life, the culmination of a decade of relentless effort. I had sent out invitations months in advance. My parents had RSVP'd yes. The day before the opening, my mother called. "Michael, honey, something has come up," she began, her voice breezy and unapologetic. "Leo's midterm results came back and he did so well. To celebrate, we thought we'd take him on a little last-minute trip to the Bahamas, just for a long weekend, you understand, don't you?" I couldn't understand how they could be so thoughtlessly cruel. The grand opening of my life's dream was less important than a celebration for good grades on midterm exams, an achievement that was simply expected and, of course, fully funded by them. Mom, this is the opening, I said, my voice strained. This is everything I've worked for. Oh, don't be so dramatic, she'd laughed. There will be other nights. We'll come in for dinner sometime next week. Have fun, sweetie. They didn't come the next week or the week after. They finally graced my restaurant with their presence a full month later, expecting a hero's welcome. That night, as I stood by the kitchen doors, watching them hold court at the best table in the house, telling their friends how they had made all this possible, I felt a familiar cold resignation settle in my bones. I was not their son, I was their investment. And now, with Leo's graduation on the horizon, it seemed the time had come for them to cash in. The summons came on a Tuesday, my busiest administrative day. I was buried in spreadsheets, cross-referencing inventory with invoices and planning the menu for the upcoming seasonal change. The Gilded Spoon was running like a well-oiled machine, but it was a machine that required my constant, vigilant attention. Every detail, from the fold of the napkins to the sourcing of the microgreens, passed through me. It was my name, my reputation on the line. My phone buzzed, vibrating against a stack of receipts. It was my mother. I briefly considered letting it go to voicemail, but a familiar pang of guilt, expertly installed over 3 decades, made me reconsider. Ignoring her calls only ever led to more calls, each one more laden with passive-aggressive concern than the last. "Hi, Mom," I answered, forcing a note of warmth into my voice that I didn't feel. "Michael, honey, how are you? You sound busy." Her tone was effervescent, a high, tinkling sound that always preceded a request. "Just doing some paperwork, what's up?" "Well, I know you're always so busy with that restaurant of yours," she began, a subtle dig cloaked in a compliment, "but it's very important we have a family dinner, all of us, this Friday night." I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. A Friday night was prime time. It was the start of the weekend rush, the period where we made a significant portion of our weekly revenue. Leaving the restaurant on a Friday was like a ship's captain taking a rowboat out for a spin during a naval battle. "Mom, Friday is really tough for me. The restaurant is always packed. Can't we do it on Sunday or Monday?" "No, no, it has to be Friday," she insisted, her breezy tone becoming a little more firm. "Your father is very particular about it. We have something wonderful to discuss, a celebration. It's about Leo, of course. His graduation is just around the corner." Of course, it was about Leo. Everything was always about Leo. I could already feel the contours of the conversation, the way it would inevitably circle back to his achievements, his bright future, and by extension, my obligations to him and the family. "What are we celebrating?" I asked, my voice flat. "That's the surprise," she chirped. "We'll tell you all about it on Friday. We've made a reservation at the Chestnut Grill at 7. Don't be late, Michael. This is important." The Chestnut Grill was an old-fashioned steakhouse, my father's favorite. It was the kind of place where deals were made and family hierarchies were reinforced. The choice of venue was a clear signal. This was his meeting on his turf by his rules. My stomach tightened. This wasn't just a dinner, it was a strategic move. "All right, Mom, I'll see what I can do," I mumbled, already mentally rearranging my Friday schedule, trying to figure out how I could possibly step away. "Don't just see what you can do, Michael. Be there," she said, the steel in her voice now unmistakable. "It means the world to your father and to Leo." She hung up before I could reply. For the rest of the week, a sense of low-grade dread followed me like a shadow. I tried to push it away to focus on the immediate demands of my business. I finalized the new menu, held a training session with the waitstaff on the new wine pairings, and negotiated a better price on scallops with my seafood supplier. These were the tangible, controllable aspects of my life. I found solace in the order and logic of my work, a stark contrast to the chaotic, irrational demands of my family. On Thursday evening, my sous chef, a talented and no-nonsense woman named Isabella, caught me staring blankly at a prep list. "Everything okay, boss?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "You've been a million miles away all day." Isabella had been with me from the beginning. She had seen me at my most stressed, celebrated our first glowing review with me, and knew more about the sacrifices I'd made than anyone. "Just a family thing," I said, waving a dismissive hand. "A mandatory dinner tomorrow night." She raised an eyebrow. "Mandatory on a Friday? Let me guess, it has something to do with the golden boy." I managed a weak smile. His university graduation is coming up. Isabella just shook her head slowly, a look of profound understanding on her face. "Be careful, Michael. When your family calls a celebration meeting, it's usually to present a bill. Don't let them walk all over you." Her words echoed in my mind as I drove home that night. She was right. My family never celebrated for the sake of celebrating. There was always an angle, an expectation. This dinner was not about honoring Leo's achievement. It was about leveraging it. Friday arrived, gray and overcast, matching my mood. The lunch service was hectic, and by late afternoon, the familiar buzz of pre-dinner prep filled the kitchen. The sense of garlic, roasting herbs, and fresh bread filled the air, smells that normally brought me a deep sense of satisfaction. Today, they just made me feel anxious, a reminder of what I was leaving behind to attend this command performance. At 6 o'clock, I did something I hadn't done on a Friday in 5 years. I took off my chef's coat before the first dinner guest had even arrived. I handed the reins over to Isabella. "You've got this," I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Of course," she said, her expression serious. "We'll hold down the fort, you just go handle your family, and remember what I said, your spine is made of steel, Michael, don't forget to use it." I changed into a crisp shirt and slacks, feeling like I was putting on a costume for a play I had never rehearsed. As I walked out the front door of the Gilded Spoon, leaving the warm glow and controlled energy of my world behind, I felt a profound sense of unease. I was walking willingly into an ambush, armed with nothing but the knowledge that whatever was coming, it would not be good for me. The drive to the Chestnut Grill felt less like a trip across town, and more like a journey into enemy territory. The Chestnut Grill was exactly as I remembered it, dark wood paneling, dim lighting, and the low hum of conversations spoken in hushed, important tones. It smelled of old leather and grilled steak. It was my father's natural habitat. I saw them as soon as I walked in, seated at a large round table in a prominent corner as if holding court. My father, Richard, sat tall and imperious in his chair. My mother, Carol, was beside him, beaming with an almost theatrical glow. And across from them was Leo, looking relaxed and smug, scrolling idly through his phone. They all looked up as I approached, their expressions shifting. My father's face was neutral, appraising. My mother's smile widened. Leo gave me a small, dismissive nod before returning his attention to his screen. "Michael, you made it," my father said, as if my punctuality was a pleasant surprise. "Sit down, son, we were just about to order drinks." I slid into the empty chair, the leather cool against my back. The air was thick with unspoken expectations. A waiter appeared instantly, a testament to my father's regular patronage. He ordered a bottle of expensive Cabernet without consulting anyone, his usual power move. The small talk was excruciating. My mother asked about the restaurant in that vaguely condescending way of hers, calling it my little place. My father quizzed me about my quarterly profits, not out of interest, but as if he were an auditor checking on a subsidiary. Leo didn't contribute much other than to complain about the difficulty of his final exams, a narrative I knew was heavily embellished for dramatic effect. I gave clipped, non-committal answers, feeling more like a witness under interrogation than a family member at a celebration. So I finally said, wanting to cut through the pretense, "Mom said there was something you wanted to discuss, a celebration for Leo." My father's eyes lit up. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He reached down beside his chair and lifted a thick black three-ring binder, placing it on the table with a decisive thud. My mother clasped her hands together in delight. Leo finally put his phone down, a smirk playing on his lips. "Ah yes," Richard began, flipping the binder open. "Your mother and I, with Leo's input, have been doing some planning. Your brother is about to achieve something truly remarkable. Graduating with honors, it's a milestone that deserves a celebration of equal stature." He turned the binder around for me to see. The first page was a glossy, professionally printed sheet with a title in flowing gold script, "Leo's Graduation Gala, a Celebration of Excellence." My heart sank. This was far more elaborate than I could have ever imagined. "We feel it's only fitting," my mother jumped in, her voice brimming with excitement, "that the celebration be held at the family's greatest asset." She patted my hand. "At your beautiful restaurant, Michael." I stared at her, then at my father. I said nothing. My silence was taken as rapt attention. "Now we've thought of everything," my father continued, flipping to the next page. It was a detailed floor plan of the Gilded Spoon, completely rearranged. "We'll need to clear out all these central tables to make room for a dance floor." He kept turning pages, and with each one my disbelief morphed into a cold, hardening anger. There were sections for catering, with a menu far more extravagant than my restaurant's usual offerings. They wanted a raw bar with oysters and jumbo shrimp, a carving station with prime rib, and a continuous flow of champagne. There was a page for entertainment, with a quote from a popular local six-piece band. There was a section for decorations, custom floral arrangements, rented linens in the university's colors, and, to my utter astonishment, a proposal for a large, custom-carved ice sculpture of the university's mascot. "We've even hired a party planner to coordinate it all," Leo added, pointing to a name on one of the pages. "She's amazing. She says for about 200 guests, the whole thing should be spectacular." I was speechless. I looked at the final page, the one my father had saved for last. It was a detailed budget breakdown. The planner's fee, the band, the rentals, the flowers, the ice sculpture, the premium food costs, it all added up. The total at the bottom of the page was printed in a bold, unflinching font, $85,000. I stared at the number, then looked up at their expectant faces. They were all smiling, waiting for me to share in their excitement, to express my gratitude for being allowed to host such a prestigious event. The sheer, breathtaking disconnect from reality left me dizzy. "This is a lot," I managed to say, my voice raspy. "It's a testament to your brother's success," my father boomed. "And a chance to showcase your restaurant to some very influential people. We're inviting all our friends, some of my old business contacts. This will be great for you too, Michael." "And you expect me to pay for this?" I asked, the question coming out as barely a whisper. My father's smile tightened. The jovial mask slipped, revealing the hard, demanding expression I knew so well. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "Pay for it, Michael, you're providing it. The venue, the staff, the food, it all comes from the restaurant. That's your contribution. We," he gestured to himself and my mother, "will graciously cover the band and the decorations. It's a team effort." So their contribution was a fraction of the cost, for the optional extras, while I was expected to shoulder the entire operational and material cost of the event, which would easily run into the tens of thousands, not to mention the lost revenue from closing the restaurant to the public on what would likely be a Saturday night. "I can't do that," I said, my voice gaining a sliver of strength. "That's not feasible." My father's face darkened completely. The pretense was over. This was the real meeting. "Feasible? Don't talk to me about what's feasible," he said, his voice laced with indignation. "Do you remember where you were 5 years ago? Do you remember who came through for you when your feasible plan was falling apart? We were there for you. We gave you the money that saved this restaurant, the restaurant you are now so hesitant to share with your own family." There it was, the $5,000 loan, the mythical sacrifice, polished and presented as my eternal, unbreakable chain. "Your mother and I have invested in you," he continued, his voice rising. "We invested our money, our support, our family name. Leo's graduation is the first major family event since your success. It is your duty and your privilege to host it. We are calling in the debt." He leaned in even closer, his eyes hard as stone, and delivered the final, crushing blow. "You owe us, Michael." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "You owe us, Michael." It was the thesis statement of my entire life, the foundational belief upon which my family operated. My success was not my own, it was a debt to be collected at their convenience. In that moment, watching the three of them, my father, stern and demanding, my mother, her face a mask of wounded expectation, my brother, looking on with an air of entitled boredom, something inside me finally snapped. It wasn't a loud, explosive break, but a quiet, clean fracture. The part of me that had always craved their approval, that had bent and contorted itself to fit their narrow. Tive simply ceased to exist. I sat there in the ringing silence, my mind a vortex of emotions. There was the hot flash of anger, so pure and potent it almost made me tremble. It was followed by a wave of profound, bottomless sorrow for the son they never truly saw, the one who had worked himself to the bone not just for success, but for a scrap of the validation they handed to Leo so freely. I thought of the missed grand opening, the lectures on fiscal responsibility, the dismissive little place comments. It all coalesced into a single, unassailable truth. This was never going to change. They mistook my silence for submission. I could see it in their faces. My father's expression softened slightly, shifting from command to magnanimous victor. My mother gave a little nod as if to say, "There, that's settled." Leo picked up his phone again, his part in the drama concluded. He had gotten what he wanted, as always. "Good," my father said, closing the binder with a sound of finality. "I'm glad we're all on the same page. Now the party planner, a lovely woman named Diane, will be in touch with you next week to start coordinating the logistics. You'll need to give her your full cooperation, Michael. We want this to be seamless." Seamless? He wanted me to seamlessly dismantle my business for a night to throw a party that cost more than my first year's operating budget. He wanted me to pour my resources, my staff's energy, and my own hard-earned money into a monument for my brother's ego. And he wanted me to do it with a smile, grateful for the opportunity. I looked down at the table, at the polished wood, the gleaming silverware, the binder that represented their grand, delusional plan. Then I looked at my wallet lying on the table beside my plate. An idea cold and clear as ice formed in my mind. It was a small gesture, almost laughably insignificant in the face of their $85,000 demand, but it felt like the only sane response in a world of madness. Slowly, deliberately, I reached for my wallet. I opened it and took out a single, crisp $100 bill. My movements were calm and measured, belying the storm raging inside me. I held the bill between my thumb and forefinger for a moment. My father watched me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He probably thought I was offering to pay for dinner, a pathetic attempt to curry favor. I leaned forward and placed the bill gently on top of the black binder, right over the words "Graduation Gala." The three of them stared at the money, then back at me. The air crackled with a new kind of tension. I met my father's gaze directly. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to hold my stare. The power dynamic in that moment shifted. I was no longer the defendant, I was the judge. That's my contribution, I said. My voice was quiet, perfectly steady, and utterly devoid of emotion. For a beat, nobody moved. The meaning of my words and the gesture that accompanied them slowly dawned on them. It was a complete and total rejection of their entire premise. It wasn't an argument, it wasn't a negotiation, it was a verdict. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Michael, what on earth do you mean? Leo's jaw dropped. He looked from the money to me, his smugness evaporating into pure disbelief. Are you kidding me? He sputtered. But it was my father's reaction that I will never forget. His face went from confusion to a deep, mottled red. His eyes bulged slightly, and a vein I had never seen before began to throb in his temple. He looked as if I had physically struck him. What is this? He growled, his voice a low rumble of thunder. What is the meaning of this insult? I didn't answer him. I had said everything that needed to be said. I pushed my chair back from the table, the legs scraping softly against the floor. I stood up, smoothing the front of my shirt. I felt strangely calm, weightless. Michael, you sit down right now, my father commanded, pointing a trembling finger at my chair. This conversation is not over. Yes, it is, I replied, my voice still quiet. I turned and walked away from the table. I didn't look back. I could feel their eyes burning into my back, 3 pairs of eyes filled with shock, fury, and utter incomprehension. I walked through the hushed restaurant, past the tables of strangers enjoying their meals, and out into the cool night air. The moment the door to the Chestnut Grill closed behind me, the adrenaline hit. My hands started to shake, and I had to lean against the cold brick wall of the building to catch my breath. I had done it. After a lifetime of swallowing my resentment and playing by their rules, I had finally drawn a line. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. I had detonated a bomb in the middle of my family, and I knew the fallout was still to come. But as I stood there under the dim streetlights, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Free. The drive home was a blur. My mind was replaying the scene at the restaurant on a loop. The thud of the binder, my father's arrogant pronouncements, the look of stunned outrage on their faces as I walked away. By the time I unlocked the door to my apartment, the initial wave of adrenaline had subsided, replaced by a profound, trembling exhaustion. The weight of what I had just done began to settle on me. I had not just refused a request, I had rejected their entire worldview. This was an act of war. I had just enough time to pour myself a glass of water before my phone, which I'd left on the kitchen counter, began to buzz. It was my mother. I stared at the screen at her picture smiling up at me, and a wave of preemptive guilt washed over me. I let it go to voicemail. A few seconds later it buzzed again, my father. I silenced the call. Then came a text message, the first drop in what I knew would be a torrential downpour. It was from my mother. Michael, I am absolutely heartsick. I cannot believe you would humiliate your father and me like that. And in front of your brother, please call me immediately. We need to fix this. Fix this? To her, fixing it meant me apologizing, acquiescing, and restoring the family's dysfunctional equilibrium. Before I could even process her message, another one came through. My father, his was not so gentle. That was the most disrespectful, ungrateful thing I have ever witnessed. You will call me and apologize. We will be discussing your future in this family. My future in this family. The threat was as transparent as it was predictable. Then came Leo's contribution. WTF was that? You ruined everything. Dad is losing his mind. You better fix this, Mike. This party is important. The messages were a 3-pronged attack, perfectly encapsulating their roles in the family machine. My mother with emotional manipulation, my father with authoritarian threats, and my brother with entitled whining. For the next hour, my phone was a relentless torrent of their collective rage. Voicemails piled up. My mother's voice went from pleading to tearful. My father's messages were clipped, angry commands. They tried calling from my mother's cell, then my father's, then their home landline, a coordinated, desperate assault. I felt like I was huddled in a trench, with explosions going off all around me. A part of me, the part conditioned from childhood, wanted to pick up the phone and smooth things over, to absorb their anger and accept the blame just to make the noise stop. It would be so much easier to surrender. Then my phone buzzed with a message from a different name, Isabella. Hope the dinner wasn't as bad as we predicted, her text read. Restaurant was solid tonight. We hit our numbers. Call me if you need to vent. Reading her words was like a lifeline. It was a message from my world, the one I had built, the one that made sense. It was a reminder that I had a life, a success, and a support system entirely separate from the toxic vortex of my family. I decided to call her. Let me guess, she said, picking up on the first ring. It was an ambush. You have no idea, I breathed, sinking onto my sofa. They want me to host a graduation party for Leo at the restaurant, an $85,000 party, and they expect me to provide the venue, food, and staff for free as my contribution. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. $85,000, she finally said, her voice dripping with disbelief. Are they insane? They said I owe them, Izzy, for the $5,000 they loaned me years ago. I heard her let out a short, sharp laugh of pure derision. Unbelievable, what did you do? I put $100 bill on the table and told them it was my contribution. Then I walked out. This time her laugh was full and genuine. You did not, Michael, that's brilliant. I've been waiting 5 years for you to do something like that. Good for you. Good for me, Izzy, they're losing their minds. My phone hasn't stopped buzzing for an hour. My father is talking about my future in this family. I think I might have just blown everything up. Maybe it needed blowing up, she said, her voice becoming serious again. Listen to me, Michael. You've been letting them chip away at you for years. You built the Gilded Spoon on your own. You paid back that loan. You don't owe them anything. What you did tonight wasn't an insult. It was setting a boundary. A boundary they have been stomping all over for your entire life. Her words cut through the noise in my head. A boundary, that's what it was. It wasn't just a rejection, it was a declaration of independence. I had spent so long trying to manage their expectations that I had never stopped to define my own limits. They won't see it that way, I said quietly. Of course they won't, she agreed. People who benefit from you having no boundaries are never happy when you build one, but that doesn't mean you're wrong. Let them be angry, let them throw their tanter. You just have to hold the line, don't answer the phone tonight. Let them scream into the void, you deserve a night of peace. We talked for a few more minutes, her calm, logical perspective acting as an anchor in my emotional storm. When we hung up, I felt a renewed sense of resolve. She was right. Answering their calls now would only be submitting to another round of abuse. I needed space to think, to solidify my position before the next inevitable confrontation. With a deep breath, I turned my phone completely off. The sudden silence in my apartment was immense, almost shocking. The absence of the buzzing, the pings, the constant demanding presence of my family was a relief so profound it felt physical. I walked through my quiet apartment, the space I had paid for with my own labor, and looked out the window at the city lights. The barrage was over for now. I knew this was just a ceasefire, not the end of the war. They would regroup, they would re-strategize, they would come at me again, likely in person. But for the first time, I felt ready. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was defending a territory I had just claimed for myself. Tonight I would rest. Tomorrow I would prepare for the final battle. 2 days of blessed, manufactured silence followed. I kept my phone on silent, screening calls and only responding to texts from friends and work associates. The attempted communications from my family tapered off from a frantic flood to a slow, ominous drip of messages like, "We need to talk, in person." I knew they were planning their next move, and I used the time to prepare for mine. On Isabella's advice, I went to my office and dug through my old financial records. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for: the original loan agreement I had signed with my father and the carbon copies of the 11 checks I had written to pay it off, plus the final one for the accrued interest. I even found the bank statement showing the final check being cashed. I put them all in a neat folder. It felt ridiculous to have to gather evidence to prove a fact to my own family, but I knew my father. He operated in a world of his own making, and the only thing that could occasionally pierce it was cold, hard proof. The confrontation came on Sunday evening, as I knew it would. I was at the Gilded Spoon cashing out the registers with Isabella after a busy brunch service. The last of the staff had gone home and the restaurant was quiet, filled with the satisfying calm that follows a successful shift. Then through the glass front doors I saw them pull up. My father's big dark sedan. He, my mother, and Leo got out of the car and marched towards the entrance like a delegation arriving for a hostile negotiation. "Showtime," Isabella said under her breath, giving me a supportive look. "You got this." "Lock the doors behind them," I said quietly. "I don't want any customers walking in on this." My father pushed the door open without even checking if it was unlocked and strode in, his face a thundercloud. My mother and Leo followed in his wake, my mother looking nervous and my brother looking petulant. "Michael," my father began, his voice dangerously low. He didn't even say hello. "We are here to finish the conversation you so rudely ran away from." "I didn't run away," I said calmly, leaning back against the host stand. I was on my home turf now, surrounded by the fruits of my own labor. The dynamic felt different. I ended a conversation that was disrespectful to me and my business. "Disrespectful?" he scoffed, his voice echoing in the empty dining room. "You want to talk about disrespect? Humiliating your family with a stunt that I can only describe as childish theatrics. Was it as theatrical as bringing a binder with an $85,000 party plan to a dinner and telling me I was footing the bill?" I countered. My mother flinched. "Michael, that's not fair," she interjected. "We only want what's best for the family. We want to celebrate your brother. Why must you be so difficult?" "Because your definition of what's best for the family always seems to involve me giving and Leo taking," I said, my gaze shifting to my brother who was actively trying to look bored, as if this was all beneath him. "This is not about Leo taking anything," my father roared, taking a step forward. "This is about you fulfilling your obligation, the obligation you have had since the day I wrote you a check for $5,000 and saved this entire enterprise from ruin." This was it, the moment I had prepared for. "Okay," I said, holding up a hand, "let's talk about the loan." I walked over to the small office behind the host stand and retrieved the folder I had prepared. I came back out and laid it on the nearest table. "You're right, Dad, you gave me a loan 5 years ago, a loan, not a gift, and I was grateful for it. But this narrative you've built, this idea that I am eternally indebted to you for it, is false." "What?" I opened the folder. "Here is the loan agreement we both signed. It specifies the amount, $5,000, and an interest rate of 4%. I slid it across the table to him. "And here," I continued, laying out the copies of the checks one by one, "are the 11 monthly repayment checks for principal and interest. And here is the final payment, which I made 11 months after you gave me the money, clearing the debt in full. And just in case there's any doubt," I added, placing the final document on top, "here is the bank statement showing that you cashed that final check." My father stared at the papers, his jaw working silently. He had no response. The proof was undeniable, a stark refutation of the myth he had so carefully constructed for years. I wasn't finished. The dam of my resentment had broken, and years of suppressed truths came flooding out. "You want to talk about investment," I said, my voice rising with an emotion I could no longer contain. "Let's talk about it. You took out a second mortgage to pay for every single penny of Leo's university education. You bought him a car, you paid his rent, that is an investment. When I wanted to go to a 4-year school, you told me it was a luxury and that I should go to community college and work to pay for it myself. So I did. I worked 3 jobs, Dad. 3 jobs for years while I put myself through school and saved every dime to build this place. Where was the family investment then?" I turned to my mother. "You missed my grand opening, the most important night of my life. You went to the Bahamas to celebrate Leo's midterm grades. What part of that was supporting the family?" Carol looked stunned, her eyes filling with tears. We didn't know it meant that much to you," she stammered. "You didn't know?" I asked, incredulous. "How could you not know? The real reason you didn't know is because you weren't paying attention. You were never paying attention to me because all of your attention was always on him." I pointed at Leo. Leo, finally jarred from his feigned indifference, stepped forward. "That's not true. They supported you. They gave you the money." "They gave me a loan, Leo, a loan I paid back with interest," I shot back. "Something you wouldn't know anything about because you've never had to pay for anything in your entire life." A heavy silence fell over the room. I had laid all the cards on the table, all the ugly, unspoken truths of our family's history. My father was still staring at the paperwork, his face pale. My mother was openly weeping. Leo looked like he'd been slapped. Finally, I took a deep breath, my anger receding, leaving only a vast, aching sadness. "I love you all," I said, and it was true, which made it all the more painful. "But I cannot continue to be a part of this dynamic. My success is not a family piggy bank. This restaurant is mine. I earned it. I am happy to host a family dinner for Leo's graduation. I will gladly reserve the best table for you and treat you all to a wonderful meal to celebrate. But I will not be extorted. I will not host an $85,000 spectacle built on a foundation of guilt and a non-existent debt." I looked at my father. "The relationship I want with you, with all of you, has to be one based on mutual respect, not a list of fictional obligations. That's my final offer." No one said a word. The truth, in all its brutal clarity, had finally silenced them. I had said my piece. The ball was now in their court. I didn't know if they would be able to accept it or if I had just signed the divorce papers on my own family. But as they stood there, defeated and speechless in the middle of my restaurant, I felt a sense of clarity and rightness. Whatever happened next, I would be standing on my own 2 feet on ground that I had earned. The silence that followed my declaration was the most profound I have ever experienced. It was a vacuum, cleared of all the usual noise of accusation, expectation, and denial. My father, Richard, who always had a response, a justification, or a command, simply stood there, his eyes fixed on the damning paperwork that dismantled his favorite story. My mother's quiet sobs were the only sound in the vast, empty space of my restaurant. Leo looked utterly lost, a prince stranded without his kingdom. Finally, my father slowly lifted his gaze from the table and looked at me. There was no anger left in his eyes, just a sort of weary, hollowed-out confusion. He looked older than I had ever seen him. Without a word, he turned, walked stiffly to the door, and left. My mother gave me one last, pleading, tear-streaked look before scurrying out after him. That left only Leo. He lingered for a moment, shifting his weight from foot to foot, his usual confidence completely gone. I didn't know you paid it back," he mumbled, gesturing vaguely towards the papers. "He always said." I know what he always said, Leo, I replied, my voice softer now. The story work. D better for him that way. He nodded, unable to meet my eyes. The party. The party they planned is not happening, Leo. Not here, but my offer for a celebratory dinner stands. A real one for you. He just nodded again, then turned and shuffled out the door, leaving me alone in the quiet of my restaurant. Isabella emerged from the office, where she had discreetly remained during the entire confrontation. Wow, she said, her eyes wide. That was intense. I think it's finally over, I said, feeling the tension of the last few days of the last few decades begin to drain out of me, leaving me feeling hollow but clean. In the weeks that followed, a new, fragile reality began to take shape. The $85,000 graduation gala, unsurprisingly, did not happen. I heard through the grapevine that they had a small, catered affair at my parents' house, an event that was likely strained and shadowed by the confrontation that had preceded it. Leo called me about a week after that night. It was an awkward, stilted conversation. He accepted my offer for a graduation dinner, and so on a quiet Tuesday evening he came to the Gilded Spoon alone. We sat at a small table in the corner, and for the first time in our lives we talked, really talked. Without our parents as intermediaries or audience members, the layers of ingrained resentment and rivalry began to peel away. He admitted he had taken his advantages for granted. I admitted that my resentment towards him was often misdirected anger at our parents. It wasn't a magical fix, but it was a start. It was the first brick in a foundation for a new, more honest relationship. My relationship with my parents remains a work in progress. My mother called a few times, her conversations tentative, circling the edges of an apology she didn't seem to know how to give. I accepted her attempts with grace, understanding that her own identity was deeply entangled with my father's. My father has not spoken to me since that night. I know I wounded his pride in a way that he may never recover from. He built his world on a certain order and I had shattered it. Maybe one day he will be able to see me as a son rather than a subordinate, but I am no longer holding my breath. I am no longer putting my life on hold, waiting for an approval that may never come. The peace I feel now is profound. Running my restaurant no longer feels like a frantic, defensive struggle. It feels like a joy. The air has cleared. I walk into the Gilded Spoon each morning with a sense of ownership that is deeper than just a name on a deed. It is mine emotionally, spiritually. The weight of their expectations, a ghost that has haunted me for decades, has finally been exorcised. I've learned that true family isn't about obligation or debt. It isn't a transaction. It's about showing up not just when it's convenient, but when it matters. It's about celebrating each other's successes without laying claim to them. My family may be broken, but I am not. I am whole. I have my business, which is thriving. I have the respect of my staff. I am building a tentative, real relationship with my brother. I have my own life. And for the first time, that feels like more than enough. Am I the bad guy for refusing to fund my family's delusion? Maybe in their story, I am. But in my story, I'm the man who finally learned to value himself. And I wouldn't trade that for anything.